give people a little bit of added time to join us. I gotta mute myself, it's so loud. All right, I think we'll get started in just a minute. Jean, did you see my chat? Okay. I'm just gonna wait one more minute. Not have the distraction while talking, that's the only thing. Yeah, oh, thank you. Sorry, we have a Zoom update that's giving us a little bit of trouble. So we're working it out and then we'll get going. Okay, we're good. All right, so I think we'll get started. I just want to say welcome to everybody here. This is an awesome turnout. I'm really excited. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Julie Mercier, Community Development Director. It's great to see you all. Thank you for taking time out of your busy lives to attend tonight's virtual educational session on the Stretch Energy Code. Article 12 on the subsequent town meeting warrant regards the adoption of the Stretch Code, which is just one of the 6 criteria that the town needs to satisfy to become designated as a green community. Tonight's session will be recorded over Zoom and by RCTV and will be live on channel 22, which is Comcast, and channel 33, which is Verizon, and also on YouTube. For anyone who can't participate tonight or who wants to watch it again, I'll send out the RCTV link and the posting, and I'll post it on the Climate Advisory Committee page when it's ready. And I'm just going to quickly share my screen and show you where the Climate Advisory Committee page is. So if you can all see that, over on the left-hand side, I have a link to stretch code information. So this page is accessed through the town website under boards right here, right underneath boards. There's Climate Advisory Committee, and then over on the left, information, and that's where I'll post the link to this video. So just give me one second. Tonight's session will first include a presentation by Neil Duffy of the Department of Energy Resources and Mike Berry of ICF International, which is a global consulting services company. Megan Aki of Metropolitan Area Planning Council is also with us tonight, and she can help answer any questions during the Q&A. So after the presentation, we'll open up the floor to Q&A. During the presentation, if you'll all keep yourselves muted, that would be really helpful. If you have a question or you want to speak, you can let me know via the chat feature in Zoom, or you can use the raise hand feature in Zoom to alert me that you want to speak. And that should be available to you if you go to the participants tab and go over to your name. It should be an option that where you can raise your hand, and I'll actually see it on the screen so I can alert the presenters that there's a question. Once we do acknowledge you, if you'll just identify yourself and then ask your question, that would be great and helpful for us as we take notes in preparation for town meeting. And then just really quickly before I turn it over to Neil, I want to identify some of the people who are here with us tonight. So from the staff side of things, we have me and Jean Delios, Assistant Town Manager, and then I also saw Colleen O'Brien, the Director of Operations from the RMLD, join us. And I'm sorry if I've missed anyone who's joined recently from staff. And then trying to think if I have seen any select board members yet. I see some former select board members. If I'm missing you, I'm sorry, I can't see everyone on my screen right now. So with that, I'll turn it over to Neil Duffy from the Department of Energy Resources for our presentation on the Stretch Energy Code. Thank you very much. Neil, are you with us? I'm sorry.
Looks like he froze.
Yeah, he froze and it looks like he's gone. So let me just see if he re-enters. Oh, and I'm told that Karen Herrick from the Select Board is with us tonight. So welcome, Karen. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Julie, for putting this together. I did see Neil before he disappeared.
Yeah, hopefully he'll come back. I don't know if Mike Berry from ICF is able to.
Here comes Neil. I'm letting him in now.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Hey, Julie, I dropped off. I don't know if that happened to a bunch of people at the same time or.
Hi, Neil. Sorry, I said thank you for rejoining us and we're ready for your presentation if you're able to screen share.
Okay, great. Yeah, sorry. I somehow lost a connection. Hopefully that won't happen again. Let me grab the presentation. So thanks, Julie, and thanks to the town of Reading for having me. I'm Neil Duffy. I'm the Northeast Regional Coordinator with the Green Communities Division at the Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources. As Julie mentioned, I'm joined by Mike Berry from ICF International. ICF administers the Mass Save New Construction Program in the state. They also work with us on stretch code outreach and consulting, and also work with us on the Green Communities Program on tasks like annual report reviews and that sort of thing. So great resource and glad to have Mike join us. I'll talk some about the Green Communities Division and the Designation and Grant Program and provide an overview there briefly, and then we'll jump into stretch code and Mike will take over most of that part of the presentation, and then we're happy to open it up for questions. So just briefly, the Green Communities Division, we like to think of ourselves as the clean energy hub for all Massachusetts cities and towns. So we do have programs and provide support to communities that are not green communities. And the way that we provide that support is with funding and technical assistance for renewable and efficiency programs, stuff like street lights or building efficiency measures and electric vehicles, electric charging stations, that sort of thing. And we also tend to be liaisons to communities when they are doing clean energy projects and may want some sort of contact with other folks at DOER, like our renewables division, for instance. So currently, there are 271 green communities in the state. About 80% of the population lives in a green community at this time. And to date, we've awarded over $136 million in grants, providing over projected over $20 million in savings a year to the communities combined. There are just over 500 grants have been completed, and we've managed to garner a significant amount of savings, such that it's the equivalent of taking about 5,000 houses off the grid or removing 10,000 or almost 11,000 cars from the road. We are authorized to provide $20 million annually in grants and loans. And those grants tend to fund energy efficiency projects at municipal facilities for the most part, like projects like HVAC upgrades, LED light conversions, weatherization, that sort of thing. Just to provide a picture of what some of your neighbors have been up to who are green communities, some of the towns around you, the ones with the larger grant amounts, like Lexington, Woburn, Winchester, Tewksbury, they've been a green community for a number of years. So they've managed to really leverage our program and have applied and been awarded multiple grants over the years. So if designated, Reading, any town that becomes a designated green community, the first thing that happens is you receive a designation grant, and that grant is the same for all municipalities. It's $125,000, and then there's an adder based on your population and per capita income. So in Reading's case, it would be approximately $160,000 based on the last population per capita that I saw. So it'd be around 160,000. Once that designation grant is spent and closed, then you would be eligible to apply for our competitive grants, which are available annually, and those are capped at $200,000. And again, these grants tend to fund or do fund municipal energy efficiency projects. So measures in your schools or a town hall or police or fire stations, that sort of thing. Street lights. So to become a green community, Julie mentioned there's 6 criteria. So you're being in a municipal light plant community, there is a 6th criteria or 6th hoop to jump through, which in your case would be joining the Renewable Energy Trust, which involves adding a charge to your electric bills. But once, and that hasn't happened yet. But the 5 criteria to become a green community are the ones you see on the screen, and we're really focusing on the 5th here tonight, which is the stretch code. But I'll briefly just touch on the other 4. The first 2 are related to one another. The first one is that there needs to be, as of right, zoning in place for renewable or alternative energy generating, or research and development, or manufacturing facilities. So one of those three things. And then the second criteria is that the permitting process for such facilities cannot be longer than a year. Often towns like Reading may have zoning in place that actually meets this criteria and will not really have to do anything because you probably have a district that has by right research and development or manufacturing already. The third criteria is to create an energy reduction plan and an energy use baseline. And that, so you would establish municipal energy use in a given year. You could go back at this point, you could go back as far as fiscal year 18. And you would create that baseline, and this is municipal use, so not residential and commercial. And then you develop a reduction plan to reduce that by 20%. The fourth criteria is to adopt a fuel efficient vehicle purchase policy, which is a policy that we have that would need to be adopted by the town and the schools. And it basically says that whenever you are replacing a vehicle, that you would be replacing it with a vehicle that meets the fuel economy standards that we set. Important to note on the fuel efficient vehicle purchase policy is that emergency vehicles and heavy duty vehicles are exempt, so they don't have to follow the policy. The fifth criteria is the stretch code, and technically in the statute it says it's minimizing the life cycle cost of new construction. So just for full disclosure, it is not a requirement that you adopt the stretch code. It is a requirement that all new residential and new commercial construction, you need to reduce the life cycle costs. The reason that adopting the stretch code is the path that every green community has taken is we don't know any other way to do that. So it really is to adopt the stretch code, but I just to put it out there that that is not what what's written in the legislation. So currently this map actually needs to be updated because the town of Walpole just adopted the stretch code about 2 days ago. So there's 285 municipalities that have adopted the stretch code. It's over 84% of the population lives in a stretch code community at this point. And the reason that there's that delta of that difference between 284 or 85 stretch code communities and 271 green communities is there are communities like yours who have adopted the stretch code, but they haven't yet become a green community and they're working towards designation. So likely next year, there will be something like 284 or 85 green communities, or maybe more, hopefully. So I'll say a couple things about the stretch code, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mike Barry. One is that it does need to be passed at town meeting as a general bylaw, and it is just as you can adopt it, you can unadopt the stretch code at town meeting. It's never been done. We've never had someone unadopt it, but it's just important for you to know that. And it only applies to new residential construction and new commercial construction over 100,000 square feet or over 40,000 square feet for conditioned spaces like labs and supermarkets. So additions and renovations and repairs are not impacted by an adoption of the stretch code. It would be, you know, you basically would still be using the same code that exists now in Reading for those types of projects. With that, I think I will turn it over to Mike Barry at ICF.
Thanks, Neil. We can jump to the oh, the slide's actually a good one. So thanks everyone for having me. I've done, as Neil mentioned, all the towns have adopted the stretch code as of this week with Walpole's adoption. I've done 245 of these stretch code informational sessions since 2010, when the Green Communities program first launched and the stretch code first rolled out. And I can honestly tell you that the slide and the title of this slide is actually the case where the stretch code is no longer a stretch. In your town today in Reading, builders can build homes two ways. They can build them prescriptively or through the performance path. I always try to tie the prescriptive path to baking a cake. You're going to follow the directions are on the box. It's a box cake, and as long as you follow directions, at the end of your cook, you're going to have a cake. So the performance path is a little bit different. The performance path allows for trade-offs, allows builders and homeowners the opportunity to determine what's important to them, and also what measures that you put into a home that will provide the most effectiveness for energy efficiency to be installed. And so, as Neil mentioned, if we can go to the next slide. What the stretch code does is stretch code eliminates the prescriptive path. So again, today in Reading, you can build a home two ways. If you were to adopt the stretch code, it removes the prescriptive path and only has you, for new construction, only allows for homes to be built through the performance path. As Neil mentioned and showed on the map, a lot of the towns around Reading today have adopted the stretch code. And as many know, builders are nomadic. They don't just work in one town. So a lot of builders that today are working in Reading have built the stretch code. So again, it's not a stretch. And in speaking to your code officials, they have been and have been working with builders who not only build the stretch code, but have been advising builders in the town of Reading today to build this way. One thing we'll talk about, and we're not going to get too deep into it since it is 7 o'clock on a Thursday night and I don't want to put everyone to sleep, is that codes will change. And where we're seeing codes go are to what we call more outcome or performance-based codes. So if we could please go to the next slide. Reason why we test for performance, or why we with a stretch code want to do the performance path, is it's not that prescriptive codes aren't good, especially again using the analogy of baking a cake. At the end of the day, you're going to still have a cake. It may not be the cake your grandmother cooked or you cook, that it's a family recipe. The performance code is going to allow people to really focus on those key areas. And I always use this picture that's shown on this slide as a great example of why we test for performance. We don't live in our attics. We don't live in our basements. Yeah, we may have mechanicals in our basement. We may have our washer dryer, or we may store, Christmas decorations or other things in our attic. But for the most part, we don't live in those spaces. The condition envelope where we live, the spaces that we live, we want to keep the heat and cooling in those spaces. Here in New England, we have to worry about things like ice damming in the winter. We have to worry about condensation, mold, moisture issues in homes. And again, the reason why we test for performance is that little gaps can add up a lot. So tiny gaps that are missed during the actual act of constructing a home, so not sealing things properly, can allow for heat loss and also moisture mitigation. A lot of people are concerned when they think of the stretch code that the stretch code is going to create an issue where homes are built too tight. That's actually the opposite. Performance path construction requires you to work with a HERS rater. A HERS rater is going to actually work with the builder to not only make sure the home is insulated right, that it's also ventilated right. They're required to, as part of their work, the HERS raters have to follow a standard called ASHRAE 62.2, which is about ventilation. So it actually looks at the conditioned space of your home, how big your home is, the number of occupants by bedroom space, and actually make sure that your home is going to be ventilated properly. And it's going to be ventilated through mechanical ventilation. And again, a lot of people are concerned when they hear the term mechanical ventilation because they assume there's an additional cost. Typically, on the average home built to the stretch code, mechanical ventilation means a bathroom vent fan that's rated for constant use. This is the typical bathroom vent fan that you're using probably today, and is probably being used today in Reading for normal construction. Again, we want to ventilate the home through mechanical because we don't want to ventilate through areas where we're going to be bringing in things like dust and VOCs that may be things stored in the basement or things up in your attic. So if we can go to the next slide. This really kind of dives into what a HERS rating is and more speaks to the HERS rating process, which we'll talk about in the next slide. But so what the HERS rating is it looks at how your home uses energy, and it looks at it from a holistic view. So it's how your house operates as a system. So your heating, your cooling, your lighting, your appliances, how your house sits on the lot, the orientation, the kind of windows, insulation, all this is factored in. And the HERS rating is through energy modeling. And what it does is on the right-hand side of the slide, you see the HERS index scale. And what this scale shows you is as you move up the scale is how much more energy a home uses. And as you move down the scale, you move to what they call net zero homes. A net zero home is just that, a home that uses as much energy as it puts back into the grid, so it's nets out. Today, we have homes being built in Massachusetts that are running at -30 on this HERS index. So they're actually putting more power back into the grid than they're actually using. Is that the norm? No, it's actually exciting that we're doing that, but we're a long way away from having people build to the net zero standard. Where the HERS rating is today, the performance path is a 55. So that's why you see that sign where it says this is a 55. Existing homes, my home on the Cape, it's an 1830s farm home. When I first bought it, it was somewhere in the 180 range on the HERS index. I put in better windows, air sealed my house, added insulation. I was able to drive my house down into the 120, 130 range right off the bat. What does that mean? It means that right after doing that work, I was able to cut down on 1 tank of oil. I heat with oil because that's all that's available where I live. And when I first bought my house, oil was 99 cents a gallon. And at 275 gallons per tank, you know, the savings weren't big, but when oil prices jumped to $4 a gallon, saving that 1 tank of oil per heating season made a huge difference. So my investment in energy efficiency paid off, and that's what the HERS index was meant to do, was to show that an investment in energy efficiency was to pay, there was a significant payback in actually energy saved. So if we can go to the next slide. So what is the HERS rating process? So the HERS rater is the person you see on the right-hand side. They're actually putting a blower door into a home. A blower door is used for infiltration testing. Anyone who's ever had this done, what it does is identifies all the areas that your home is leaking from, typically in an existing home, but in a new home, what it's doing is it's identifying the areas where we could make some significant improvements before things like drywall go up, or after drywall goes up, but before a trim, and some of the final touches are done on a home. Today in Reading, HERS raters are being used in your town. The base code, IECC 2015, and the code that's coming in, IECC 2018, requires HERS raters to perform performance testing like this infiltration test that's being done in this picture, and duct testing. So the things you see inside this red bracket are required by code today in Reading, whether you build to the prescriptive code or the performance code. What the stretch code requires through performance testing is energy modeling. What energy modeling does is energy modeling is going to be taking building plans as designed, putting them to an energy software, and calculating where they fall on that scale that I showed in the previous slide on the HERS index. If the home is already better than a 55, then no changes have to be made. If the house is near or a little bit above a HERS 55, then small changes like to mechanicals, windows, and infiltration, drops in infiltration can make a huge difference to get that home to a 55. After the plans are reviewed by the HERS rater, that HERS rating model, that initial model is sent to the building code office, to the building officials in your town to issue a permit. During the building process, the town building inspectors still do their normal inspections, but the HERS raters will come out and do in-process inspections to make sure the insulation was installed properly. They'll do in-process duct testing if there's a ducted system in the home. They'll do infiltration testing. And then when the home is completed, they'll come and do a final test, do that final blower door test, final duct test if it's needed. They'll take that information, input it into the software, and then once the software calculates that the home met or exceeded the HERS 55 target, the builder takes that information to the building code office in your town, and that's what issues the certificate of occupancy. We've heard from many towns, and again, I've done 245 of these, that at first building code officials were really leery about having the HERS raters involved in the process, but HERS raters act as a third-party energy guide and are there to assure that not only the home is being built right, but the builder is going to be able to meet and exceed the building energy code, which to many builders has always been a challenge. And so a lot of people will ask, they'll say, well, what happens if the home doesn't meet the HERS index? What happens if the home doesn't meet the standard? And the builder hires the HERS rater. And again, they're hiring HERS raters today in Reading. So the only difference is this energy modeling piece. And just like whether you're hiring a plumbing sub or an electrical sub, they still have to meet the code. So the builders are hiring today HERS raters in Reading to do this work as a subcontractor. So again, if there's a concern that this additional cost or this additional work is going to add a burden to people building homes in Reading, and again, the stretch code only affects new construction, it should not be a concern because again, this is a requirement today in Reading. If we go to the next slide, the next slide is cash flow analysis and cost of building to the stretch code. Since Reading is a muni electric territory, right now in Reading, the only time a person would be eligible to participate in the Mass Save New Construction program is if they are heating with natural gas through National Grid. If a person is building a home using natural gas, they are eligible to participate in the new construction program offered through Mass Save. And what this shows is that the average home, which ICF, my company, we researched, that's being built in Massachusetts is 2,550 square feet, 3-bedroom home. The reason why it says Worcester is that we have to use to call weather stations, and Worcester is the smack dab in the middle of the state, so it's the easiest weather station to use as far as the most snow or most weather that you're going to probably have is going to be in Worcester. And so what we did is we took this house and we built it as it would be built today by code. And so this home was originally designed, it hit a 59 on the HERS index. To get to a 55, the builder had to add in $2,416 worth of work. That is the mechanicals and measures that they had to install, plus the HERS rater fees. Again, they are paying a HERS rater today, but they're not paying for that modeling piece. So there is a little bit of an additional cost there. With the utility rebates, they received almost $1,400 in utility rebates, which means they're only out of pocket about $1,000. When you take that $1,000 and you pull it through a 30-year fixed mortgage, and again, at the mortgage rates that we had at the time were roughly about 4%, we're definitely seeing mortgage rates a lot less than that. The estimated additional cost to this home was very small. And then when you factored in the reduced energy cost per year, and again, using energy costs, I think from 3 months ago when we did these, and energy costs typically rise in the wintertime. So this home was essentially cash positive in year 1. And then in year 2, it was even more cash positive. And as the person lives in the home and as the measures stay there and continue to operate, the home remains cash positive and will continue to be that way if the price of heating goes up or cooling goes up. If we go to the next slide, this is a breakdown of how the typical builder could meet the standard. So if you look at this chart in the blue section, this is the home as built. Again, if just using the plans, this is a code built house. This is following the cake recipe. They would have gotten to a 59. So they were putting in windows that met the prescriptive standard of the code, heating equipment, cooling equipment that was pretty much the standard efficiency of equipment installed in a code built home, including a domestic hot water system, which is not very efficient at a 0.62. And then this is a ducted system. This is a furnace, which means you're going to have ducts that are either traveling through unconditioned space, which means above insulation in the attic or below insulation in the basement. And so these ducts were what we call 4 cubic feet per minute of leakage, which is not super tight. So to meet the stretch code, and this house actually got below the stretch code at a 50. The way they got there was by putting in a slightly better window, a 1% difference in the furnace, which got them $100. What the cost was $100 to put in a more efficient cooling piece of equipment. And then even a better domestic hot water system. But what's more important, and I always point this out, is that they significantly cut their duct leakage in half. And there's a construction cost there of $200. But again, I would say, and I'm a licensed builder in Massachusetts, that if I'm hiring a sub, and especially an HVAC sub, there should be no leakage to the outside space if it's done right. But if I'm hiring a good sub, I shouldn't be paying anything different to get tighter ducts. Tighter ducts should just be what is standard on these homes. So even though this shows a cost of $200 to get a tighter ducted system, I would still argue that these things can come at almost no cost and significant savings over the long haul of the home. So with that, I know that's a lot of information to throw at you guys in a very short period of time, but I will hand it back to Neil real quick to talk about the proposed timeline for changes to the building code, and then happily answer some questions. And I saw some pop up in the chat window while I was presenting. So with that, I'll hand it back to Neil.
Thanks, Mike. That's great. And yeah, I'll just reiterate that the examples that we show, that was a gas home, but we have similar cost analyses for other heating fuels for those base homes that sort of pan out the same way in terms of the homeowner being cash flow positive in the first year, but also just make sure to mention that we do acknowledge that these are examples and that each home is different. So it can vary, but that's sort of a typical example. So I just want to make sure I mention that. It's just important to mention, I'm not going to get too far down the road on proposed code changes because it's in the future and it's hard to speculate on what will be happening in the future. But the energy codes go on 3-year cycles. So we do know that codes will change. And when you adopt the stretch code, you are adopting the current code and then future amendments and modifications. So I just want to make sure that I talk a little bit about what that can mean. And so the next code that we anticipate would be a draft stretch code, would be published in spring of 2021. And there would be hearings in the spring plus additional regulatory hearings. And the goal is to have a new stretch code ready to align with the timing of the adoption of a 10th edition of the building code in probably the summer or fall of 2021 with an effective date of either January or July of 2022. And one reason I mention this is that there are conversations about a stretch code having some sort of zero energy component to it. again, I don't want to speculate on what that might look like, or even, I don't even know if it will have it, but I just want to mention it because it is out there and there's information about it now, and it's important for you to know. If there were to be a zero energy component, I think that it would likely be some sort of opt-in in 2022. So municipalities that wanted to have a stricter code that required some sort of renewable component or zero energy component, you could opt into it, but those who had the stretch code in place would sort of continue moving on with a more sort of standard stretch code, if you will. And then at some point years later, it would likely transition to a zero energy code overall for everybody. So that's just something I want to mention, just to have full disclosure about what the code is, and to make sure everyone understands that it's not just the code that exists now, but it's the future additions. I will, just for the sake of the presentation, I'll put my contact information up here. That's our website. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions that we don't answer tonight. And then I think I will maybe stop the screen share and we can go to questions.
So I see a few questions in the chat, if we want to do those first, and then we can open it up to questions from the audience. Is that okay with everybody? So the first question that I see on here is from Vivek. Let me see. And he says, please explain how ventilation is checked. HERS and blower door gets to air tightness.
So as I mentioned during my presentation, that a HERS rater is going to take plans of a home that we call as planned, so what's designed, and look at the home, run them through this energy modeling software. The software is going to calculate by square footage, by, again, a number of bedrooms, which is making the assumption of number of occupants. And then it's going to look at that and make sure the home is meeting or exceeding the HERS 55. If, let's say, the home isn't and things need to be done, like tightening up the shell, so you have to make the home tighter, air tighter, obviously then you're going to want to look at ventilation. So what the modeling software actually does is, again, using this ASHRAE standard 62.2, which is 100% focused on ventilation, is it's going to tell you how much cubic feet of ventilation you need per square footage of home. And then the HERS rater is going to recommend to the builder or homeowner what type of ventilation system will get them there. And again, based on the type of construction, the type of home, it's typically something like, again, a Panasonic Whisper Quiet or Whisper Green bath fan rated for constant use. That's on, it's basically set it and forget it. The HERS rater typically will help set that up too, to make sure it's operating at the proper amount of air exchanges it has to do per hour. But again, this all comes out of the modeling software, and again, a concern that I always have, and this is one of the things that I will always tout that's a benefit of the performance path over the prescriptive path, is the prescriptive code tells you have to ventilate a home. What it doesn't tell you is if it was ventilated properly. The performance path will tell you that it is actually ventilated properly and is meeting that ASHRAE standard. So the HERS rater does that, and so that's a benefit to the homeowner, is that to make sure that if their house is going to be too tight, it is ventilated right. So hopefully that answers your question.
So Julie, can I just ask clarification there?
Sure.
So Mike, thanks. But that's like one setting for the rest of the building. I mean, that's pretty much like one setting forever. And normally ventilation depends on the number of people in the house, and because a lot of it depends on CO2 levels and things like that, and which can vary over time. And so I'm just curious, how would that be dealt with?
Yeah, and it's a great question, but I mean, again, I don't like to turn questions back around, but right now, if you were to build a home, you follow the prescriptive path, there's no there's nothing to say that the home was ventilated right in the beginning. The plus side is once a home is energy modeled, that modeling information is provided to the building code office. So anytime if a homeowner was concerned about, maybe they have their children moving back in the home or in-laws moving in with them, and now their number of occupants is growing and they have a concern, they could at least check to make sure, based on the square footage and the tightness of their homes, what type of ventilation would be needed, which again, is not being done on a prescriptively built home. It just says you have to follow the standard of making sure the home is ventilated right. So
Yeah, no, and I think it's also a function of humidity, but okay, I'll just stop there.
no, I agree. And I think the thing is that what we're finding is, and it's one of the things with COVID right now, is we are all spending more time in our homes and we're spending more occupancy times in our homes. So we are actually starting to see things where we're starting to see the things that, especially our homes that weren't built to some standard for ventilation, where I've actually had people call us and say, my home was built in 1988 and I'm noticing an immense amount of condensation, mold and mildew growing inside my home and I'm not certain why. And typically that is, again, it's a function of ventilation. It's a function of contact with cold or warm air hitting like a surface where you're getting condensation to build up. So I think we're being we're all a lot more attuned to how our homes operate. But again, I think the performance path provides that third party verification that at least by the standard of ASHRAE that the home is being ventilated properly.
I'll move on to the next question if that's okay. So we have a question from Mario about whether the stretch code applies to renovations of residential structures or not.
Yeah, so
oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Mike. No, you can take it.
Yeah, and it looks like there's another question that's right after this that also says basically the same thing. So what I can say is that, again, doing these presentations, that the past versions of the stretch code did address renovations and additions. However, the current stretch code is exempt. Renovations and additions are exempt. Only new residential and commercial construction over 100,000 square feet are affected by the stretch code. So if you're seeing information online, that information is either old information or inaccurate. The current stretch code that we have in Massachusetts today, all renovations and additions will default to the current base code in your town of Reading or whatever town has adopted the stretch code. So if you have concerns about that, I can honestly tell you again, it's either misinformation or it's just old information you're seeing online. But currently, it does not affect renovations or additions, regardless of the size of renovation. And we did just last week talk to your building code officials in town, and they also confirmed that renovations and additions are exempt, regardless of size, in the town of Reading would be exempt from the stretch code. Neil, I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I'll just say for folks who may be town meeting members, I mean, that's a really important point when this comes up in front of town meeting, because it is easy to find information about older versions of the stretch code that clearly state that renovations and additions are impacted by the stretch code. And as Mike said, that's just because those are FAQ or documents that are referring to an older version of the stretch code. So I'll just emphasize that point. That's all.
Thank you, Neil. And I just wanted to add that there was another question that was similar but a little bit different, which is about whether rebuilding after a total loss of a dwelling would be considered renovation or new construction. And if you want to start, I can maybe add to that after.
I can also add to that too, if you want me to start, Neil. And
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I would also just point out the fact, again, talking to your building code officials last week, is that the building code officials in your town, based on the building code in Massachusetts, have the ability and do so, have what's called subject to local interpretation, which means the building code officials can deem a project based on what it is, whether it's going to be a renovation, addition, or new construction. But typically, especially something after significant fire damage or any type of damage, tends to always default to a renovation. And it sounded like, based on our conversation with your building code officials in town, is that's the way they view it, is it would still be considered an existing dwelling, regardless of the amount of renovation or construction that was being on site. And Neil, I don't know, or Julie, if you guys have additional information.
Yeah, I will add, I think that sounds right. I think it will depend on like how much of a total loss we're talking about. And I would never want to speak for the building commissioner, but I can always check with him on that question and get back to the person who asked it after the meeting. So, if I may, I'll move on to another question we have. It's regarding funding, and whether the competitive funding would slant towards communities with more commercial than residential properties, and whether that would put us at a disadvantage when we're competing with towns that have potentially greater savings.
Yeah, so the competitive nature of the grants has nothing to do with commercial or residential properties. The competitive grant rounds are, we are reviewing the projects that are submitted against one another. So it's all the projects are at municipal facilities. So for instance, an LED lighting interior LED lighting conversion in an elementary school, or a new boiler at a fire station, or a weatherization project at a library. To give you a sense of how competitive they are, last competitive round, we had 103 competitive grant applications, we had 103 competitive grant applications, and we awarded 103 grants. So everyone who applied, or maybe there were 104, I think there was maybe one town that did not receive a grant, and that's because they applied for one project that just wasn't sort of meeting the requirements, the sort of base requirements. But we tend to try to provide a grant to every community that applies. That doesn't mean that everyone got everything that they asked for. If with the grants being capped at $200,000, some communities may apply for multiple projects. Say you apply for 4 $50,000 projects. We may fund 3 of them, or partially fund 2 of them and completely fund 2 of them. There's no matching requirement. So the competitiveness is really based on the payback, the energy savings, the emissions reductions, and the energy savings per dollar spent.
Thank you, Neil. There's a question on here about more information about the requirements and types of opportunities that Reading would be able to take advantage of on the grant side of the equation.
Sure. Yeah. So the requirements are at the very base level. It needs to be something that's going to reduce energy use. So it's really energy conservation measures. We don't fund, for instance, with competitive grants at this point, or we haven't historically funded like solar PV, but some of the projects, like I mentioned before, like lighting conversions, HVAC upgrades, new boilers, new water heaters, variable frequency drives for pumps, weatherization, exterior lighting, anything that saves energy, for the most part, is eligible. EV electric vehicles. We don't fund full purchases of electric vehicles or hybrid electric vehicles, but we'll provide some funding for that. Charging stations, that's what we've historically funded. I'm just trying to see opportunity. So it's annual. Often these are projects that you may be hoping to do anyways for your buildings. For instance, there probably is a focus on HVAC systems and controls and being able to control air quality and ventilation right now due to COVID. But a lot of those measures, even though the energy use will probably increase over the next couple of years because you're going to be bringing in more outdoor air. Those types of measures tend to save energy in the long term, and they may be the types of things that you need in buildings right now. So that's a good example of a practical way to use our grants to address some of your building and infrastructure issues that you have.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Todd regarding the year one break-even analysis, which assumes over $1,000 in energy rebates, and whether, since Reading is on RMLD, would we be eligible for those rebates and credits? And if not, that would make our break-even significantly longer.
Yeah, so the example given was for a natural gas heated home. And so if in that case, that home would be eligible for the Mass Save new construction rebates. And so a new home in Reading that's heated by natural gas would be eligible for those rebates. I can bring up, if you give me a second here, I'll bring the presentation back up, because I do have, Mike, I might have to have you speak to this quickly, but we do have some slides on an electric home that we can bring up. And so you can see here that there are no rebates if you build a new home that's heated and cooled electrically. So the cost would basically be an extra $2,200. But when you look at the cost to the home buyer with the estimated savings, then you're still looking at a positive cash flow for the homeowner in the first year. Again, this is sort of a typical home coming through the Mass Save program.
Yeah, and I think, Neil, if you go to the, oops, I was going to say, if you go
sorry,
to the,
no, I'll do it.
Yeah, if you don't mind going to the, breakout, I think that would be helpful too, is that what we're seeing in Massachusetts, and I think we're seeing a lot of the, even in the cold climate of the Northeast, is that heat pump technology, electric heat pump technology has become more and more kind of part of our current way we're building homes. I've been doing energy efficiency work for over 20 years. And when I started, one of the things we were doing was weaning people off of electric baseboard heating and putting them towards any other type of fuel. And now we're going to what we call beneficial electrification, which is using electric products like heat pumps, because they're the most efficient way to heat and cool your home, and especially on a new construction build where you're able to address things like leakage of your shell and make sure that you're building your home right. So when you look at this, a home that was being built electrically, so again in Reading, which would not be eligible for any Mass Save incentives, again, just something simple like changing your window design, going down to a 0.27 window from a code required 0.30 window, going from a standard electric EF hot water heater. So this is a hot water heater you probably see in every home in Massachusetts that's been replaced at least recently. That's just your standard electric hot water heater. Going to a heat pump hot water heater, which is a little bit more money. You can see $660 is the cost to go from a standard EF to a heat pump, a higher EF hot water heater. Again, not a lot of money when you think of the amount of energy saved, and then even more important when you look at the heat pump that's being installed, having a higher HSPF, which again is not big. The 12 HSPF is your standard like Mitsubishi hyperheat system, which is again the average type system that's installed. Your out-of-pocket costs going from again just an entry-level heat pump to a little bit higher efficiency heat pump is $600. And so, as Neil mentioned on the first slide, that the payback, you're net positive in year one, even better than on natural gas heat because you're getting higher efficiency. So one thing to note too is because you are a muni electric, you're not the first town that is has a municipal power plant that has looked to adopt the stretch code. Towns like Lakeville, who have a municipal electric plant, has actually looked at things like having the stretch code as a benefit because as more people are building electric homes, whether it's again for energy savings, for saving money, or just for carbon reduction and just being, you know, cleaner or greener, at the end of the day, this also means less power that's being pulled out of your power plant, which again, you know, with municipalities, having capacity issues can be a huge challenge. And as we see more people start to look at electrically heated homes, this is just one more reason why the stretch code is going to push people to higher efficiency, which means lower loads, which is huge for, again, municipalities that are generating their own electricity. So.
Okay, I do have a couple more questions. There's one here, whether the stretch code mandates the fuel source used for heating or cooling, or is it solely focused on energy efficiency?
So again, because the stretch code is based on performance path construction, and performance path construction and performance modeling is looking at how a home works as a system. Again, it's higher efficiency. So obviously, you know, with propane or oil heated homes, you know, you're going to get to a maximum efficiency that you can get out of those types of systems that, you know, maybe aren't the same or equivalent to like a natural gas or an electric system. With that being said, again, because the performance path allows for trade-offs, you can go with a lower efficiency system that maybe is heated, you know, or powered by a different fuel type, because you can offset that drop in efficiency somewhere else in your home by, again, putting in better windows, better insulation, making sure a home is tight, making sure any duct leakage is addressed outside of conditioned space. So it allows for trade-offs, and again, the modeling shows that. So even though there can be said that there's benefits to using one type of fuel for heating or cooling that's better, at the end of the day, higher efficiency is going to get you there, but so is other measures that you're going to be installing in your home. Again, the charts that we provided in this show things like insulation, air infiltration, even lighting, and appliances will add into this overall HERS index. So the trade-offs do allow for to address lower efficiencies that may be seen with other fuel types.
Thank you. I just want to make a quick announcement to anyone who's just joined or coming and going. If you can please keep yourselves on mute. I've gotten some comments about feedback. That would be great. And another question that just came in, whether you can explain the calculation of the amount that would be added to the local electricity bill.
So I'm assuming that's referring to the Renewable Energy Trust and the Renewable Energy Charge. So that is a 20th of a cent per kilowatt hour. And for a typical home, that usually amounts to about $4 a year on your electric bill. So, I mean, it could be a little bit more if you use more, but that's typically what the impact would be. And legislatively, it does need to be something that is billed to the customers. It needs to be on their bill. And it's the same charge that investor-owned utility customers pay, National Grid and Eversource Electric customers pay on their bills. And I guess the last thing I'll mention is that if it's never been increased, and it takes an act of the legislature to increase it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Neil and Mike. I don't see any more questions in the chat. I'm wondering if anyone has their hands raised. I don't see any, but speak now or forever hold your peace. Not seeing any other questions. So. Oh, Karen has her hand raised. So.
Hi, Julie. Thank you. Thank you, Neil and Mike. I am so excited that we had a builder on the call tonight. That's super helpful. I think this is exciting stuff, and I appreciate everybody investing the time to hear more about this. I know the stretch isn't much of a stretch anymore, but I think this is the right path. And I just wanted to thank everybody for joining us, and thank you for DOER. These presentations are super. I learned something every single time.
I agree with that sentiment, and I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. And with that, I'm not seeing any other questions. I guess we'll wrap up. And like I mentioned, I'll be sending the link to this video around to everybody. I'll share the presentations if I'm able to, and I will post it on the Climate Advisory Committee webpage. And if anyone has any follow-up questions, feel free to email me. It's jmercier@ci.reading.ma.us. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Have a great day.
Hey, Julie, there is a question about HERS inspectors that just came up.
Oh, okay, great.
Mike, I don't know, it's just how many HERS inspectors are there in the state? Has there ever been a shortage or delay?
Yeah, so great question. And again, I can speak to this one from both my work with DOER doing these stretch code sessions, and also my day job managing the residential new construction program. I can tell you that when performance path construction first kind of hit the streets here in Massachusetts, yeah, there was a shortage. There was issues at times with capacity, even though there weren't many towns adopted the stretch code at that point. What it wasn't a matter that there wasn't enough HERS raters. There wasn't a way to easily find HERS raters. And I can tell you today that through the Mass Save New Construction Program, and this is just the Mass Save New Construction Program, there's 62 companies providing HERS rating services, employing over 200 HERS raters. If you go to the Northeast HERS Rater Alliance, or any HERS, NE HERS, I said it too fast sometimes, you can actually see a listing of all the HERS rating companies in Massachusetts who both work in the new construction program for Mass Save, but also who just do code compliance work. I think you'll be shocked to see the number of HERS raters. So capacity is no longer an issue. What I can also tell you is that the HERS rater fees and structures vary. They're a sub on a new construction project. I always, when I'm asked this question on what a HERS rater charges, it's the same question asked, like, what does a plumber charge to plumb a home? Or what does an electrician charge to wire a home? How big's the home? How much lighting? How much plumbing are they putting in? The HERS raters, through the new construction program here in Massachusetts, Mass Save provides a $350 stipend to HERS raters. And that is to offset the modeling costs associated with, because today HERS raters are already being paid by builders to do the performance testing. And again, the performance testing, the infiltration, the blower door testing, the duct testing varies by size of the building, how many times the HERS rater is going to go out. And so it's tough to really pinpoint a number. Again, I think if we go back to the slide that we provided, and I know we're going to be providing these slides, the average HERS rating cost, I think we factor in, typically runs around, I think between $300 and $600. But again, I've heard builders who do a lot of work and work out a fee with a HERS rater, they will get a lower rate. And I've also heard some builders actually pay HERS raters higher rates to do things like in-process inspections, training subs, making sure their HVAC subs are sealing ducts. So again, it's really tough to pinpoint a number on that one, but it is in those charts that we showed, and it does have a HERS rater cost built into it. But as far as capacity goes in Massachusetts, kudos to the DOER and the Massachusetts utilities who fund Mass Save, who have really started an industry here that has supported the growth and changes that we've seen to the code that were going to come anyhow, but have also built an industry of these green jobs supporting new construction here in Massachusetts. So yeah, any HERS Alliance or ResNet, Residential Energy Services Network, RESNET, is the overarching national body that oversees HERS raters, and that's actually how you go about getting certified to become a HERS rater. So builders can also be HERS raters, and so can architects and designers, and yeah, so it's actually a benefit that someone can bring to, and value they can bring to a customer. Hopefully that answered your question.
All right, thanks everyone. I'm not seeing any other questions, but I just wanted to share my screen one last time for anyone who didn't see originally when I showed where on the website all this information is. I'm going to post it to the Climate Advisory Committee page. Let me just hold on one second. Which is on the town website. If you go to boards, it's right here, right below boards, Climate Advisory Committee. And then over on the left-hand side, there's a link to stretch code information. And if you scroll down, you'll see there's actually links to a lot of different resources. Most of them came from the Department of Energy Resources and the Green Communities program. And I will be posting the link to this presentation somewhere on this page. Maybe I'll just post it at the top for ease of access in the next few days when it becomes available from RCTV. So thank you for joining us tonight. And I'm just going to check the chat one last time and make sure there's no new ones. Looks like there aren't any new questions. So with that, I'll say thank you and have a great night.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks for putting this together. Thanks, everyone. Everyone be safe out there.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me.